Imagine a city not built on land, but floating gently on a lake, not with roads, but with canals and gardens. Yes, real gardens, floating in still water like green carpets. How did the ancient Aztecs grow food without soil in the middle of a lake? What secrets lie beneath these sleepy gardens of the gods? Tonight, we drift back in time to explore the strange, silent world of Aztec gardening on floating islands. A story of mud, magic, and midnight farming. So lie back, close your eyes, and let the lake carry you away. Hey guys, tonight we drift back in time, right into the heart of a misty lake, cradled by mountains and pierced by 1,000 shimmering canals. The water laps gently against your canoe as reeds sway like sleepy dancers on the breeze. You paddle slowly, each stroke soft and gliding, past floating rectangles of rich black earth that seem to hover just above the lake's surface. There's a soft smell of wet soil, damp wood, and blooming marigolds that you've entered Tenochtitlan, the bustling capital of the Aztec Empire. But don't let the calm lake fool you. This city is alive, pulsing, engineered with astonishing brilliance. Those islands, they aren't natural. They're called Chinampas, floating gardens, and they've been hand-built by a civilization that decided, against all logic, to conquer a swamp and turn it into one of the most densely populated cities in the world. And you're here for a gentle stroll, or rather, a quiet float through it all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your wooden canoe drifts forward. You glance over the edge, and the water is crystal clear. Beneath the lilies and duckweed, you can see the structure of the Chinampas. Thick mats of reeds anchored with stakes, heavy with soil, layered with years of compost. Around you, small birds chirp sleepily, and somewhere in the distance, a flute plays a wandering tune. What's wild is that these gardens don't actually float, not like rafts or lily pads. They're semi-floating platforms, tethered to the lake bed by willows called ahujotes. Their long roots hold the soil in place while their trunks keep the entire setup shaded and protected from erosion. You run a hand along one as you pass. It's cool and damp, full of life. Historians still argue whether these Chinampas were truly invented by the Aztecs or whether earlier civilizations like the Xochimilca started the trend, with the Aztecs scaling it up into a high art. Either way, you're here now, gliding silently between these brilliant green rectangles like a curious ghost. In the early morning mist, you pass a farmer bent low, tending to rows of amaranth. He doesn't look up, just shifts aside so your canoe can pass. A basket of freshly picked tomatoes sits nearby, steam rising gently from the heat of his hands. The air smells of basil and earth and lake water. There's something magical about this place. It's quiet, productive, and beautifully organized. And somehow, it's built entirely out of mud and human stubbornness. The Aztecs didn't find good farmland and build their city near it. No, they said, let's build farmland where there isn't any, and then literally made the ground appear under their feet. You hear the slap of a paddle behind you, and another canoe glides past. It's a woman carrying baskets of marigolds and chilies, her boat painted with red stripes. She nods politely. You try to smile, but remember, this is the 1400s. You're not really supposed to be here. One of the truly clever things about the Chinampas is their microclimate. Because they're surrounded by water, the soil retains moisture better than traditional fields, making droughts far less devastating. The canals also help regulate temperature, keeping the gardens cooler in the day and warmer at night. And thanks to this clever setup, The Aztecs could harvest up to 7 times a year, an agricultural output so absurdly high, it fed a city of over 200,000 people. Of course, not everything was sunshine and marigolds. There were risks. Sometimes Chinampas collapsed into the water. Sometimes canoes crashed through them. And then there was the wildlife, particularly the mosquitoes, which were enthusiastic. One 16th century visitor reportedly counted more than 30 bites on his legs before he even reached shore. Still, you settle deeper into your canoe. The sounds of the city are far away now, muffled by distance and water. You trail your fingers through the cool lake and wonder, what would it feel like to live here every day? To wake up on a floating garden, paddle to work, and end your day surrounded by corn, birdsong, and the hum of insects. Suddenly, you hear a low splash. Something large slips beneath the water. You freeze. Don't worry, it's probably just a turtle. Probably. And even if it isn't, well, you probably weren't going to survive this anyway. You ease your paddle into the water again, letting the canoe drift lazily around a bend in the canal. The morning mist is lifting now, revealing more of the strange, stunning sprawl of floating farmland. But how did this all begin? Why would anyone, let alone a future empire, look at a swamp and say, yes, this is home? You float backward through time, past the neat rows of maize and squash, past the bustling market canoes, all the way to the early 1300s. That's when the Mexica, later known as the Aztecs, first arrived in the Valley of Mexico. And let's just say real estate was limited. All the good land? Taken. Other city-states had snapped up the prime farmland, the defensible hills, and the cleanest water sources. So the Aztecs looked around, shrugged, and said, guess we'll take the swamp. Lake Texcoco was a brackish mess, part fresh, part salt, surrounded by unreliable shores, with soggy islands and thick reeds instead of fields or forests. But the Aztecs weren't known for quitting. Legend has it they followed a prophecy, settling wherever they found an eagle perched on a cactus with a snake in its beak. Naturally, the bird picked a tiny island in the middle of this watery mess. Historians still debate whether this eagle sighting was metaphorical or literal, or perhaps a savvy way for the Aztecs to justify seizing land no one else wanted. Either way, they stuck with it. You look down into the water and imagine that island before the Chinampas. A lump of mud, really, not even big enough to pitch a tent. But over decades, the Aztecs transformed it into the heart of an empire. They extended it, layer by muddy layer, into a city of temples, palaces, canals, and gardens. And right from the start, they knew the key to survival wasn't building on the land, it was building around it. The lake became their moat, their irrigation, and their pantry. And eventually, their farmland. You pass a small island where a man is balancing on one leg in a canoe while using a pole to stir the water. He's fishing with a net so fine it glimmers like a spider web. His aim? Tiny white fish that were once a staple here. Tasty, protein-rich, and just the right size to sprinkle on tamales like ancient Lake Parmesan. But back in the 1300s, there wasn't much to eat. The Aztecs struggled to feed themselves. Famines weren't rare. For a while, they were the scrappy underdogs, looked down on by wealthier neighbors who mocked their swampy digs. Enjoy your mud pies, you imagine one noble saying. And so they innovated. Rather than farm on the limited land they had, they reached into the water and began creating land. They started small, bundling reeds together into rectangular mats, then layering lakebed soil and compost on top. These mats were staked into place with long wooden poles, especially willow saplings, which would eventually root and stabilize the whole setup. Over time, these structures grew heavier, denser, and more permanent. Eventually, they weren't floating at all. They were suspended islands, anchored in place, soaking up nutrients from the lake. You pass a freshly built Chinampa now. It's still patchy, mud glistening between tufts of grass, with young crops poking through. At the edges, willow poles stick out like ribs, waiting to take root. Two children are patting down soil while their father unrolls a mat of reeds nearby. They work in silence, barefoot, with dirt up to their elbows. It's methodical, peaceful, like watching someone knit a blanket from the earth. One early chronicler described Chinampas as earth floors floating upon the waters. But you know better now. These were engineered ecosystems, living, breathing platforms designed not only to grow crops, but to clean water, trap silt, and provide habitat for fish and birds. Basically, ancient Aztec permaculture, with better scenery. Of course, the swamp had its dangers. Crocodiles, leeches, and biting flies were all part of the daily landscape. And let's not forget the surprise sinkholes. Great fun if you enjoy sudden plunges into murky water. It wasn't glamorous, but for the Aztecs, it was home. Historians still puzzle over just how quickly they scaled up this system. Some say it took generations. Others argue that necessity and a booming population forced them to build Chinampas at a breakneck pace. What's certain is that by the time the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, there were thousands of these artificial islands, feeding hundreds of thousands of people. You float past an older man now, sitting on the bow of his canoe, lazily sharpening a wooden paddle. His eyes are closed, face turned toward the sun. The Chinampa behind him is lush, rows of chili peppers glowing red and gold in the light. A heron lands nearby, perfectly at ease. There's something deeply restful about this place. It hums with quiet purpose. No roaring machines, no glowing billboards, just humans and water, soil and sun, floating in a kind of accidental harmony. You trail a hand in the lake again, wondering what secrets lie beneath the murky bottom. Old tools, lost jewelry, a sunken temple, probably all of the above. This lake has seen centuries of struggle, of celebration, of transformation. And you're just passing through. Your canoe glides along a narrower canal now, almost brushing against the leafy edges of a garden so dense it looks like it's floating in midair. Vines spill down the sides, and the tops of corn stalks rustle quietly in the breeze like lazy whispers. It's time to see how these islands came to be more than just soggy rafts. You lean forward, drawn into the miracle of invention unfolding before your sleepy eyes. Creating a Chinampa wasn't just tossing some dirt into the lake and hoping for the best. No, it was a process, part craftsmanship, part backbreaking labor, and all rooted in sheer determination. Imagine if someone told you to build a floating farm using only mud, sticks, and your cousin's discarded fishing net. The Aztecs didn't just try it, they perfected it. You arrive at a spot where several men are constructing a new Chinampa. It starts with staking out a rectangular frame in shallow water, usually about 30 meters long and 2.5 meters wide. The corners are planted with thick willow poles, already beginning to sprout tiny leaves. These ahujotes are more than just corner markers. They'll grow into trees that keep the structure from drifting, protect it from wind, and provide much-needed shade. Between the poles, the builders begin weaving mats of reeds and branches, tight, springy, and somehow incredibly sturdy. Then comes the fun part. Layer after layer of lakebed mud is hauled up in baskets, oozing like chocolate pudding, and dumped onto the woven mat until it forms a raised bed of dark, fertile soil. The smell is pungent. You scrunch your nose. It's the scent of damp decay, mixed with the occasional whiff of duck droppings and swamp flowers. Not exactly perfume, but it means life is taking hold. And soon enough, the builders will plant the first maize seedlings, carefully spaced, lovingly tended. Historians still argue whether these early Chinampas were meant to be temporary at first, quick-fix solutions during harvest shortages, or if the Aztecs had long-term designs from the start. What's certain is that once a Chinampa was established, it became a kind of generational heirloom. Families passed them down, expanded them, repaired them. Some islands were over 300 years old by the time Europeans showed up. You paddle through a channel that curves between two of these aging giants. The water here is darker, more still. You spot lily pads and the faint ripple of fish beneath the surface. Dragonflies hover like lazy helicopters. One lands on your sleeve, stares at you like you interrupted its nap, then flits away. The older Chinampas are thicker, with dense root systems that run so deep they've practically fused with the lake itself. At their edges, you notice tiny retaining walls made of woven reeds or piled-up stones. Simple barriers to keep the soil from slipping into the water during storms. And oh, the storms. You pass a woman whose Chinampa has been partially flooded. She's ankle-deep in muddy water, replanting squashed herbs with the determination of someone who's done this too many times before. Chinampa life wasn't easy. Rain could be both a blessing and a soggy, garden-drowning curse. But it's the efficiency of these islands that boggles the mind. Each one worked as a kind of loop. The lake supplied nutrients. Plants drew them up. Any runoff was reabsorbed. Waste, from humans, animals, even spoiled food, was recycled as compost. Nothing was wasted. And because they were constantly mulched and replenished, Chinampas didn't deplete the soil the way traditional farms often do. Some archaeologists believe the Aztecs may have even practiced companion planting here, growing crops like maize, beans, and squash together to maximize yield and keep pests confused. Whether they consciously understood the science or just followed what worked, well, historians still debate that, too. You pass by a tiny altar tucked into the edge of one Chinampa. It's made from stone and bone, with a little clay figure nestled among marigolds. Probably a local offering to the earth spirits, or maybe to Tlaloc, god of rain. A gentle breeze sends the scent of copal smoke drifting your way, earthy and sweet. The Aztecs didn't just farm here, they believed here. And here's a quirky little fact. The Chinampa builders sometimes inserted live fish into the muddy foundations of new gardens. Not just for food, but to stir up nutrients, control insect larvae, and help the soil breathe. It was like building an aquarium, but with lettuce on top. You chuckle softly at the thought. Somewhere between brilliance and madness lies a man saying, "Let's build a floating garden and fill it with tilapia." And the wildest part? It worked. As your canoe slips further along the channel, the sun breaks through the clouds in ribbons. Everything glows for a moment. Maize leaves like gold, the water shimmering, the willows casting dappled shadows across the soil. The scene is absurdly peaceful. And yet, every inch of this place was built through sweat, repetition, and an almost poetic level of obsession. One slip, one flaw in the design, and it would all sink. But it didn't. It stayed afloat. For centuries, you smile, settling deeper into your boat. The rhythm of the paddle, the buzz of bees, the hush of wind through the willows, it's all become a lullaby. And this is only the beginning. Your canoe noses gently alongside a thick, green Chinampa, where the soil is so rich and dark it practically shines. The scent hits you first, fresh basil, sweet marigold, and that unmistakable aroma of earth after it rains. You ease your hand out to touch the surface of the soil, expecting it to crumble like sand. But no, it's springy, spongy, and alive. This is where the Aztecs sowed their crops, and tonight, so do you. Well, almost a farmer nearby gestures with a muddy hand. He doesn't speak, just nods toward a row of young maize stalks that sway like sleepy dancers in the wind. You step off the canoe onto the soft ground, your bare feet sinking slightly into the damp soil. It's surprisingly stable, considering you're standing on what's technically an island made of mud and roots that you're in the heart of the Aztec agricultural engine now. A floating rectangle of food production. Rows of maize stretch before you, planted with almost comical precision. You see beans climbing their stalks like enthusiastic toddlers, and squash leaves fanning out like lazy parasols. This trio, maize, beans, and squash, isn't just beautiful. It's genius. Together, they form what modern agronomists call the Three Sisters. Maize provides a tall structure, beans fix nitrogen in the soil, and squash shades the ground, keeping weeds out and moisture in. But the Aztecs didn't call it permaculture. They just called it lunch. Historians still argue whether the system was learned through trial and error or inherited from earlier Mesoamerican peoples. Either way, it worked. And it worked really well. You move farther along the Chinampa and notice smaller plots. Rows of chili peppers in neat stripes, delicate amaranth waving in the breeze, and even tomatoes so plump and red they look like they're daring you to take one. There's a quiet pride in this garden. Each plant is in its place. Each row serves a purpose. And unlike modern farms with their monstrous tractors and miles of monoculture, this space feels personal that a young boy walks past you carrying a basket of harvested herbs. Episode, probably, or maybe Hoja Santa. He doesn't make a sound, just pads across the soft soil like a cat. His job, you suspect, is to deliver the herbs to the canoe now docked at the edge, where his older sister is already packing vegetables for the market. The sun catches in her braids as she hums a low tune, something ancient, haunting, and oddly catchy. But don't let the peaceful pace fool you. These floating gardens could produce up to 7 harvests a year. That's right, 7. In a world where most civilizations scraped by with 2, maybe 3, the Aztecs were pulling zucchini out of the water like magicians pulling scarves from a sleeve. The reason? It wasn't just the fertile soil, it was the constant hydration. Because the Chinampas were surrounded by water, they never dried out. The soil was moist, fluffy, and shockingly productive. Plus, farmers didn't need to walk for miles to water their crops. All they needed was a gourd scoop and a canal. You crouch beside a farmer as he tends to a row of young amaranth shoots. His fingers are stained green. His shirt is simple, frayed at the sleeves. He doesn't speak either, just flicks a beetle off a leaf and moves to the next plant. No pesticides, no drama, just silent attention. And speaking of pests, you notice small strips of reflective obsidian tied to poles above the crops. They shimmer in the light, fluttering like strange birds. Turns out, they're early scarecrows. Not the creepy straw men you're used to, but shiny deterrents that flash light and startle birds. Ingenious. And kind of stylish. Here's a fun fringe fact. Some Chinampa farmers supposedly sang to their plants. Not as a spiritual thing, but as a way to track growth. If a plant didn't grow in rhythm with its neighbors, it meant something was wrong. Too much sun, not enough water, or maybe a sneaky worm invasion. Whether or not it helped the plants, well, historians still debate that. But you have to admit, it adds a nice touch to the ambience that as you stroll farther, you come to a section where the crops change. There are flowers here, marigolds, dahlias, even orchids. You breathe in deeply. This isn't just a farm, it's a botanical wonder. Many of these flowers were used in rituals, festivals, or traded in the great markets of Tlatelolco. And others? Just grown for the joy of it. Because even in an empire obsessed with expansion, sacrifice, and warfare, there was still room for beauty. You step lightly over a low ridge of earth and nearly slip. The mud beneath your feet is slick. A frog croaks nearby. The Chinampa feels like it's breathing, taking in air, exhaling moisture, pulsing with quiet energy. You crouch, Press a hand to the ground and feel its softness. It's alive in ways your suburban backyard could only dream of. And just beyond the far edge, the canal glimmers again. Your canoe waits. You climb back in, careful not to tip the boat. As you push off, you glance back one last time. The garden fades into the distance, rows of green, brown, and gold blurring into the mist. That, you realize, is how the Aztecs fed their city. Not with huge industrial farms, not with machines, but with floating gardens, tender hands, and quiet repetition, and with dirt. So much dirt. You let the paddle rest across your lap as the canoe drifts around a bend. The sun is higher now, painting the canal in warm gold. The gardens stretch endlessly in neat rows, their symmetry almost hypnotic. But today isn't just about farming, it's about getting there. And in Chinampa country, transportation doesn't come with wheels. It comes with a paddle and a well-balanced backside. Everywhere you look, canoes are in motion, long, narrow vessels slicing quietly through the canals. Some are loaded with vegetables and flowers, others with laughing children or silent, serious elders. One particularly wide canoe carries what looks like a chicken coop. The chickens look unimpressed. You spot a young man balancing on the edge of his canoe with a pole in hand. He pushes off the lake bottom with practiced ease, gliding forward without so much as a splash. You try the same and almost topple yourself. Not as easy as it looks in this world. The canal is the road, the sidewalk, the back alley, the shortcut. Farmers commute between their gardens by canoe. Traders ferry produce to the markets. Messengers zip across the water with scrolls tucked under their cloaks. It's a waterborne rhythm. No shouting, no carts, no clatter. Just soft paddling, the occasional heron call, and the lazy creak of wooden hulls. Of course, water commutes come with unique challenges. For one thing, there's the sun. It bakes your neck relentlessly. And the Aztecs? They had a solution for that. Sunscreen. Sort of. Historians believe some farmers used a homemade sunblock made of ash, herbs, and, brace yourself, crocodile dung. Yep, thick, smelly, and weirdly effective. It blocked UV rays and may have even kept mosquitoes away. It also guaranteed you got plenty of personal space in a crowded canoe. You pass a fisherman scooping water into a clay jug. His canoe is piled with reeds and small fish, probably destined for market or dinner. He nods at you, eyes squinting beneath the brim of a wide straw hat. You smile back and then notice something curious. His paddle is carved with symbols, snakes, birds, and what looks suspiciously like a grumpy sun god. Many canoe paddles were personalized, painted or carved with household emblems or protective charms. It's not hard to imagine why. Canals could get crowded, especially during festival days when families would float their finest flowers down the waterways. Losing your canoe in the mix? A social tragedy as you round another bend. The canal narrows between two lush Chinampas. The willows overhead form a shaded tunnel. Leaves dangle low, brushing your shoulders. The air cools. You exhale. This is the closest you'll get to Aztec cruise mode. On one bank, you spot a small rest area, just a wooden dock with a hammock strung between two poles. A farmer naps there, one leg dangling, a straw hat tipped low over his face. His canoe is tied loosely nearby, gently bumping the dock in time with the water's lull, but it wasn't all naps and floating serenely through the lilies. Sometimes, the canals were guarded, especially near the city. The Aztecs constructed underwater fences, barriers made from stakes and brush, to manage boat traffic and keep intruders from slipping into sacred zones. Historians still argue whether some of these barriers were also used to collect fish or act as defensive traps. Whatever the case, you'd be wise to slow down when the reeds start looking suspiciously symmetrical. And let's not forget the lake's uninvited guests. The same waters that nourished the Chinampas also played host to surprises. Fish, yes, but also frogs the size of melons, electric eels, if you believe some fringe tales, and even the occasional crocodile. You keep your paddle in hand just a little more tightly now. You notice another clever feature. The Chinampas are arranged in a grid, like watery neighborhoods. Each island has its own set of canals that run east-west and north-south, making navigation intuitive. It's basically the Manhattan of Mesoamerican farming. Except the taxis are ducks, speaking of which, you nearly collide with one. It squawks in outrage and flaps off, leaving a trail of feathers behind. You apologize instinctively. The duck is unmoved that here's a quirky tidbit. Chinampa families would sometimes raise axolotls, those weird, smiling amphibians with feathery gills, in the canals. Not just for their cuteness, though, yes, but as a food source and medicine. Axolotl stew, anyone? Think of it as ancient amphibious comfort food. You ease the canoe forward again, passing a woman bent over the canal's edge. She's using a hollow gourd to scoop water into a small trough that leads into her garden. It's a low-tech irrigation method, but it works. She catches your eye and smiles without breaking rhythm that it's a quiet reminder. These canals aren't just roads. They're the arteries of life out here. They carry more than boats. They carry stories, gossip, goods, prayers, and the occasional family of angry geese. You pause under a willow, letting the leaves brush your shoulders like sleepy fingers. The breeze ripples the water, and for a moment, your canoe drifts perfectly still. This, you realize, was the Aztec secret. Not just floating gardens or clever farming, but motion, constant, gentle, purposeful motion. Everything, water, boats, crops, sunlight, circulating in a quiet, productive loop. No engines. No screens. Just a paddle, a patch of mud, and a good sense of balance. And maybe some crocodile dung, if you're feeling spicy. Your canoe rocks gently as you float through a more secluded canal now, flanked on either side by rows of tall maize and dense willow trees. You notice something subtle, tiny channels running off the main waterway, narrow as a garden hose, weaving their way through the roots of the Chinampas. At first glance, they might seem like rain runoff or erosion scars. But no, these were intentional, careful veins of life. Irrigation, Aztec style. The genius of the Chinampa system wasn't just in its floating gardens. It was in the water management, how the Aztecs channeled, filtered, and nourished their crops using the very swamp that once made this place unlivable. You drift closer to one of these side canals, peering down at the dark water. Tiny fish dart between submerged roots. A turtle stares up at you as if to say, "Mind the current." There's no pump, no faucet, no sprinkler system. Just gravity, clever elevation, and human ingenuity to build their gardens. Aztec farmers dug canals in geometric patterns, using the excavated muck to form raised planting beds. The water left behind wasn't a nuisance, it was the delivery system. It kept the soil moist from beneath, helped regulate temperature, and allowed for passive irrigation. And when the crops needed a little extra hydration, simple. Just scoop a gourd of canal water and pour it gently over the thirsty plants. You pass one farmer doing just that, his movements slow and deliberate. A toddler waddles behind him with a smaller scoop, missing the plants entirely and watering his own feet. A noble effort, but even this serene system wasn't without its wrinkles. The lake water of Texcoco was brackish, a mix of fresh and salty. Not exactly crop-friendly. So how did they grow anything at all? Here's where things get brilliant to protect their freshwater supplies. The Aztecs constructed dikes, massive barriers made from reeds, clay, and stone, separating the salty water in the eastern part of the lake from the fresher, rain-fed water near the city. The most famous of these was the Nezahualcóyotl dike, built in the mid-15th century. It stretched nearly 16 kilometers and helped create an artificial freshwater basin for irrigation. Historians still argue over how effective it really was. Some say it revolutionized agriculture in the region. Others claim storms and breaches made it more symbolic than functional. Either way, it shows just how far the Aztecs went to work with the water, not against it. As you paddle onward, the canal widens again. You notice more aqueduct-like structures, narrow channels leading from one Chinampa to another, some with tiny reed gates or woven filters to control flow. It's not flashy, but it works. One old man you pass is seated on a bundle of reeds, adjusting a gate made of sticks and vines. He doesn't look like an engineer, but he is. Every farmer here is. Because in a world of water, you either learn to manage it or you sink. Another clever trick. When the lake water dropped during dry seasons, farmers would deepen their canals and pile the excavated muck back onto their Chinampas, recycling nutrients and rebuilding elevation in one move. It's like giving your garden a spa treatment while unclogging your plumbing. Efficient and messy. And remember those willows? The ahujotes weren't just anchors. Their roots helped stabilize the canal edges, reducing erosion. Their leaves cooled the water, and their branches could be woven into fences, shade shelters, or even the occasional fishing pole. You spot one willow whose trunk has been twisted over generations into a natural arch. It leans across a canal like a gate to some secret garden. Vines dangle from its limbs, and a bird's nest teeters on one of its forked branches. You duck beneath it, and the air suddenly smells like wet wood and pollen. Here's a quirky fringe fact. The Aztecs sometimes used floating mats of duckweed as biofilters, natural sponges that helped keep the canal water clean and oxygenated. Not bad for a civilization without microscopes or chemistry labs. Historians debate whether this was intentional or just a happy accident. Either way, your modern water utility bill is feeling a bit embarrassed right now. You float by a structure that looks like a floating dock, but it's actually a water level marker. A carved post wrapped with painted glyphs shows how high or low the lake has risen. During particularly rainy seasons, the bottom glyphs disappear beneath the surface. In dry years, you might see glyphs that haven't touched water in months. Farmers use these markers like living calendars. A drop in water levels means they might need to dig more muck. A rise? Time to check those dikes and move young seedlings to higher ground. And, of course, the entire cycle runs on seasonal rains. You look up at the sky. No clouds yet, but the air carries that heavy, earthy pre-monsoon scent. The kind of sky that whispers, not yet, but soon. You pause the paddle and close your eyes. The breeze carries the sound of water trickling between the Chinampas. Somewhere, a frog croaks. A splash echoes from far away. You can almost feel the rhythm of the lake. Its inhale and exhale through the canals. This isn't irrigation by force. This is irrigation by invitation. And tonight, as you float gently between ancient gardens and quiet waters, you start to understand how a swamp became an empire. As your canoe glides toward a bend in the canal, you begin to notice clusters of activity ahead. Farmers gathered near a wide, open platform nestled between several Chinampas. It looks like a marketplace, but quieter, more intimate. This, you realize, is the interchange, where the sleepy engine of Aztec agriculture meets the rhythm of the city. That a man standing on the platform waves lazily to a boat approaching from the far side. The boat is long and low, stacked high with bundles of herbs, squash, tomatoes, and something yellow and fluffy, perhaps marigolds. It floats in almost total silence, except for the dip of the paddle. As it docks, two women in white tunics begin unloading, chatting softly as they pass baskets hand to hand. This isn't a modern farmer's market with artisanal logos and chalkboard signs. It's older, more subtle, but still organized, still vital. The Aztecs had no wheels, no beasts of burden in the city proper. So canoes were the lifeblood of commerce, weaving through the watery arteries of Tenochtitlan like quiet delivery vans. Scholars estimate that up to 50,000 canoes pass through the lake system every day, transporting not just food, but also firewood, flowers, fish, and even people. You imagine an Aztec mail carrier, drifting through the morning mist with a pouch of letters wrapped in palm bark, delivering whispered messages across the lake. Or perhaps a matchmaker, gliding from village to village with family tokens and tentative proposals. Even dreams had a delivery route here. The water was never just a boundary, it was a bridge. And this exchange platform you're watching? It's not random, it's strategic. Chinampas were laid out like a floating grid, and certain intersections became communal spaces where news was shared, goods traded, and the occasional political debate held between mouthfuls of grilled maize cakes. A woman in her 60s gestures toward her basket of white beans, holding up two fingers. A man in a reed hat shakes his head and offers a gourd of dried chilies in return. No shouting, no bartering war, just a soft exchange of looks, and finally, a nod. A deal is made. These tiny, almost invisible transactions supported a vast urban network. Tenochtitlan's population likely exceeded 200,000 at its peak, larger than most European cities at the time. And much of that city's daily sustenance was grown here, on floating gardens you could walk across in a matter of minutes. Not everything came from Chinampas, of course. Other regions sent in tribute. Turkeys from the north, cacao from the south, obsidian blades from the mountains. But the foundation, the dependable heartbeat, was this: maize, beans, squash, and amaranth, grown on tiny islands fed by silt and time. And the real genius? Crop cycling. Aztec farmers didn't just plant willy-nilly. They rotated crops carefully, interplanting maize with beans, which added nitrogen to the soil, and squash, which shaded the ground. Occasionally, flowers like marigold or simpasicule were included, not just for their bright beauty, but because their scent repelled pests. You paddle past one Chinampa where the golden blooms ripple in the breeze, and suddenly the air smells like peppery citrus. It's a system that feels both practical and poetic. Some Chinampas even included aquatic zones, areas of shallow water between rows where algae, duckweed, and small fish could flourish. These mini ecosystems acted like natural compost heaps, enriching the water and, in turn, the soil. You're seeing permaculture centuries before the word existed. You pause as a canoe filled with children drifts by. They're giggling, their faces sticky with fruit pulp. One child holds a net on a long stick, trying, and failing, to catch a turtle. The turtle, unimpressed, disappears with a plop beneath a lily pad. It hits you then. This place isn't a museum. It's not frozen in the past. It's alive, humming with quiet energy, subtle cooperation, and daily rhythm. This was the unseen force behind the Aztec Empire. Not just warriors and pyramids, but farmers and ferrymen, bean traders and dike builders. And as you turn your canoe to follow the canal back toward the city center, you start to see the landscape differently. What looked like wilderness now feels designed. What felt like survival now feels like stewardship. You pass a narrow bend where a woman kneels beside the water, releasing a floating basket with a tiny clay idol and a sprig of basil. A quiet offering to the spirits of the water, or perhaps to the crops, or maybe just to the day. The Aztecs had a goddess named Calcayutlacu, the Lady of the Jade Skirt, who governed rivers and streams. She was often depicted with water flowing from her dress, sometimes as a blessing, sometimes as a flood. It was said she wept for the world, but here, the tears seemed gentle, healing. You round the final bend and glimpse the distant outline of Tenochtitlan again, its temples rising like jagged teeth above the city, glowing faintly in the late afternoon light. And between you and that mighty city, gardens. Floating, breathing, waiting, not ruins, not relics, roots. As you drift farther from the Chinampas and their quiet pulse, the canals widen slightly. The air thickens with distant noise, still hushed, but no longer rural. It's as though you're leaving behind a gentle heartbeat and entering the city's slow, steady breath. You pass beneath a low stone bridge, moss-streaked and overgrown. A few young boys sit dangling their feet over the edge, dropping pebbles into the canal below. One of them hums a tune that fades into the water like smoke up ahead. A subtle structure rises from the shallows, an unassuming building of dark basalt stone with a gently sloped roof and painted beams. You recognize it from your guidebook, or perhaps a dream, a Calmacac, one of the Aztec Empire's schools of learning. But this is no rowdy boarding school with chatter and chaos. Here, silence is sacred. The Calmacac was a place for the sons of nobles and priests, young men who would become the future administrators, astronomers, priests, and perhaps even emperors of the Aztec world. It was a place of study, yes, but also of sleep deprivation. Students here were taught to fast, stay up all night praying, and memorize ancient texts passed down through generations of oral tradition. You drift quietly by the edge of the stone courtyard. A boy kneels beside a column, repeating something under his breath, a hymn, perhaps, or a bit of Nahuatl poetry. His hands are stained with red pigment from painting a codex, and his eyes look distant, almost trance-like. Inside the school, low voices rise and chant. Their tone is steady, methodical, each note a step on a mental staircase. These boys are memorizing Tanalpwali, the 260-day ritual calendar, aligning their minds with the cosmos. You wonder what it must be like to grow up in a world where time isn't measured only by sunrise and sunset, but by intricate layers of gods, symbols, omens, and days with names like 1 Death and 9 Wind that a dragonfly schemes across the surface of the canal beside you, leaving tiny ripples in its wake. Your canoe glides silently past a large painted stone covered in glyphs. It's a calendar stone, carved not for tourists, but for daily use. The Aztecs tracked not one, but multiple calendars, ritual and solar, civic and sacred, woven together in elegant, overlapping cycles. And every person born into this world had a date written into these cosmic gears, with omens and destinies determined from the start. A child born on 4 Rabbit might grow up to be a merchant, while one born on 13 Flint might be destined for priesthood or sacrifice. Not everyone agreed with these predictions. Some tried to escape them, but the calendar itself? It never flinched. It was always there, humming quietly behind the surface of things. You pass a second building, less grand than the Calmacac, but just as meaningful. This is the Telpakali, the school for commoners. Unlike the Calmacac, where boys learned to read and pray, the Telpakali trained its students in discipline, strength, and civic duty. You watch as a group of teenage boys practice spear drills in near silence, their movements fluid and precise. A teacher, barefoot, hair tied with a strip of maguey fiber, watches with a kind of quiet pride. Here, boys learn to serve the empire, carrying firewood for temples, repairing roads, hauling water to ritual fires. It was exhausting, and it was an honor to at night. They were expected to stay awake, keeping watch or singing hymns to the gods. And yes, like their noble counterparts, they too fasted. They too learn silence. It occurs to you how different this is from the way most people think of the Aztecs. Bloody, savage, brutal. And yet, the more you watch, the more you see an empire obsessed not just with conquest or ritual, but with order, with discipline, with continuity. You drift beneath another low bridge, where someone has hung a small bundle of feathers wrapped in corn husks. A quiet offering, maybe to the god Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, who watches from the shadows. The city draws nearer now. The murmur of life grows clearer. Paddles slapping water, children laughing, the occasional distant drumbeat. And in that soundscape, a strange serenity. It wasn't always peaceful here. The Aztec world had its share of violence and terror. Sacrifice was real. So were invasions and famine and grief. But beneath it all was a deep, rhythmic structure, like breathing, like a song. And now, as the canoe pulls gently toward the next wide waterway, you see it rising in the distance. The sacred precinct, white walls, towering pyramids, fire smoke drifting into the evening air, the heart of the empire. But even here, at the center of power, silence still lingers. A silence not of absence, but of awe. The sacred precinct unfolds before you like a dream. Your canoe floats slowly to the edge of a ceremonial landing where the water darkens with shadow. This was once the very center of Tenochtitlan, the beating heart of the Aztec world. From here, the empire pulsed outward in perfect order, each neighborhood, market, and shrine aligned according to both political authority and cosmic significance. You step ashore in your mind, not noisily, but gently, like a breeze slipping through an open door. Ahead of you rises the great Templo Mayor, the main temple of the Mexica people. Twin staircases climb its face like parallel rivers, one dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, and the other to Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. These were no gentle household deities. Huitzilopochtli demanded blood to keep the sun moving through the sky. Tlaloc, though gentler in name, could bring floods or drought depending on his mood. It was said that he cried tears of turquoise, and when he wept, the heavens opened. But tonight, no rituals are underway. No drums beat. No flutes wail. The pyramid sits in deep twilight, its steep stone steps catching the last gold of the day. A priest in white robes slowly sweeps the plaza with a bundle of dry grass. It's a symbolic gesture, cleansing the space before the moon rises. You watch as he moves in a quiet circle, scattering a faint trail of copal incense. The air fills with its earthy sweetness. You follow a path that leads around the base of the temple to a quieter shrine, smaller, built of volcanic stone, barely more than a single chamber open to the sky. Inside is an altar to Zacapili, the flower prince, the god of music, dance, poetry, and sleep. Yes, even the Aztecs, for all their warlike reputation, made offerings to dreams. Zacapili wasn't just a patron of joy and art. He ruled over hallucinatory visions, nighttime inspiration, and the floral world seen only in dreams. His image here is carved in delicate lines, a youthful figure sitting cross-legged, eyes half closed, as if listening to a music only he can hear. You sit for a while in that chamber. The sounds of the city, muted, distant, fall away. A moth flutters past, brushing your shoulder with a whisper. You could sleep here, and some did. There are stories, half-whispered in colonial manuscripts, that certain chosen individuals, poets, priests, seers, would sleep inside Zacapili's shrine for nights on end, seeking dreams that might carry messages from the divine. Not every dream was pleasant. Some were strange, some terrifying, some simply beautiful, but all of them were considered real, more real than waking life, even. because in dreams, the gods could speak directly. You leave the shrine slowly, mind drifting, footsteps soft. The sacred precinct continues to hum, though quietly, like a city breathing in its sleep. Beyond the pyramid, a long corridor lined with stone skulls that Tsimpantli sits eerily still. You expect to feel fear or revulsion, but somehow you don't. It's not gruesome in this light. It's surreal, quiet. The skulls, each once part of someone's story, now rest in perfect stillness, and across from them is a small, square temple painted in faded reds and blues. This was the house of the Eagle Warriors, elite fighters, yes, but also storytellers, dancers, and keepers of memory. You sit on the worn steps and gaze up at the stars just beginning to pierce the violet sky. It's easy to forget that this city, this civilization, was once home to over 200,000 people, that it was cleaner than most European cities of its time, that it had libraries, zoos, botanical gardens, and running water, that it rose, flourished, and fell, but the stars remain. And so does the rhythm of breath, as you prepare to leave the sacred precinct. Your canoe waiting once again at the edge of the canal, you take a final look back. The plaza is now bathed in moonlight, the temple stairs glowing faintly like polished bone. The city sleeps, and in its sleep, it remembers. You return to your canoe, which floats patiently on the surface like a leaf on a still pond. The city of Tenochtitlan, for all its grandeur, falls away behind you. Its temples, shrines, gardens, and bustling avenues fading gently into the soft blue shadows of night. The only sounds now are the rhythmic splash of your paddle and the quiet rustle of reeds brushing the sides of your boat. This final leg of the journey is slower still. You drift through a quieter canal now, one that doesn't lead to markets or temples, but to the far edges of the city, to the outer rim of the Chinampa zone. These were the forgotten gardens, the oldest plots, furthest from the ceremonial center, where the air feels cooler and time seems to lose its grip. Once, this area teemed with daily life. Farmers rising with the sun, children splashing in the shallows, elders teaching the names of herbs to small, attentive hands. But now, it's nearly silent as you float onward. You pass by Chinampas that are no longer well kept. Their outlines remain, but the once perfect grids of crops have surrendered to wild grasses and drifting lilies. Some have collapsed inward. Others have merged with one another, forming larger, unshaped masses. Nature is reclaiming the order humans once imposed. You pause at the edge of one such island, its soil cracked but still green with patches of wild amaranth, a sacred plant once used in ritual dough figures of the gods. A pair of dragonflies hover nearby, their wings catching the moonlight like flickers of silver fire. You lie back in the canoe. Above you, the stars swirl gently in the sky. You recognize some, the same constellations the Aztecs knew, though they named them differently. They believed the heavens were a great stone disk, with the sun and moon battling for dominance. Each night, they feared the stars might not return. And yet, here they are as your boat drifts farther from the city's remains. The outlines of modern life begin to bleed faintly into the horizon. Distant lights, a subtle hum, not the blare of traffic or the buzz of electric noise, but something else, like memory itself whispering through concrete. Because today, buried under layers of history, modern Mexico City still rests atop the bones of Tenochtitlan. Its streets follow the old causeways. Its lakes are mostly gone, but some canals survive in Xochimilco, where tourists float past mariachis and flower vendors without realizing they're sailing through time. A handful of Chinampa farmers still tend the land, as their ancestors did, using hand tools, lake muck, and a stubborn devotion to the floating soil. They're called Chinampas, and they still rise before dawn, still speak to the soil, still coax crops from floating fields in a city that forgot it was once built on water. You close your eyes now. The sound of the paddle fades completely. Your boat has stopped, or perhaps it still moves. But in your mind, you remain suspended between worlds, between centuries, between myth and memory, between sleep and waking. And for just a moment, it's as if the city rises again, whole, golden, silent, and utterly at peace. You exhale slowly. The story has ended, but the dream lingers. Good night. Your boat doesn't stop. It drifts. And so do you. It's the kind of gentle movement that doesn't jostle or jar, but instead lulls, like the soft breath of a sleeping animal. The lake's surface reflects the sky now in its fullest calm, turning the water into an obsidian mirror that holds the stars like scattered seeds. You sit upright slowly, adjusting your balance. Ahead, a faint glow hums over the water, like the memory of a lantern or a watchfire long since extinguished. You guide the canoe toward it, and as you drift closer, the source of the light becomes clear, an old fishing hut perched on the edge of a half-sunken Chinampa. Its reed walls lean slightly, half devoured by time, but the roof still holds. Papyrus and bulrushes grow thick around it, rising waist-high and rustling with the occasional sigh of wind. You step from your canoe into ankle-deep water, feeling the silt pull softly at your soles. The mud here is richer than any garden store could ever promise. You pause. There's something sacred about mud that can grow a civilization. Inside the hut, the air is still, heavy with the scent of dried fish, damp soil, and the woody aroma of copal incense. Burnt perhaps a century ago, or maybe just imagined. You sit quietly at the doorway, peering into the dark as your eyes adjust. Once, this would have been a place where a Chinampa farmer, perhaps named Tokli or Tecuani, rested between planting cycles. A place to store their koas, digging sticks, to dry maize, to offer a prayer to Tlaloc, god of rain, and hope that their island wouldn't float too far from its anchoring willows. Because yes, these islands did sometimes drift. That's one of the quirks that modern reconstructions often leave out. While the larger Chinampas were reinforced with latticework, roots, and clay walls, the smaller ones could unmoor, especially in storms. Imagine planting beans in the morning and finding them halfway across the lake by dusk. Historians still argue whether Chinampas were always anchored, or whether some were designed to float freely, resembling, in some ways, aquatic nomadic farms. There are reports from early Spanish observers that describe farmers paddling behind their crops as if herding sheep, which, you have to admit, would be incredibly efficient if you're farming in a traffic-free lake. Your fingers run across the woven floor mats of the hut, some still firm beneath the dust. The Aztecs were master weavers, not just of cloth, but of entire systems. Water, labor, faith, and food all braided together into something strong enough to resist collapse for a while. But every thread has a breaking point. This hut, though long abandoned, holds echoes of resilience. A calendar scratched into a wooden beam, a shard of obsidian blade, a painted gourd with fading geometric patterns. Each of these tells a story of a people who grew not just maize, but meaning, who tended not just gardens, but whole cosmologies, who looked at a swamp and saw sustenance, who woke up each day on floating soil, knowing it might drift, knowing it might sink, and planted anyway. You leave the hut gently. The glow has faded, but your direction feels clearer. The moon overhead dips low, brushing the lake with soft silver fingers. The wind smells of night blossoms, simpasicle maybe, or wild guava. In the distance, the call of a lone chachalaca echoes, raspy and awkward, like a bird clearing its throat at a bad moment. You smile. The Aztecs had no shortage of jokes, you know. In markets, jesters roamed freely, poking fun at nobles and merchants alike. And out here, even among the Chinampas, one imagines laughter was planted alongside beans, even when the soil was unstable, even when the floating islands refused to sit still, because in the end, all of us live on shifting ground. So we plant, and we paddle, and we try not to tip over. Your canoe slips back into the soft-moving canal with hardly a sound. The hut fades behind you like a dream you forgot to write down. But the feeling lingers, a gentle weight in your chest, like a stone you carry not out of burden, but memory. Ahead, the floating gardens resume their patient alignment. Rows upon rows of Chinampas, stretching toward the horizon in tidy green lanes, divided by mirror-smooth water. They're like library shelves, except instead of books, each row is filled with life. Amaranth, chilies, maize, and flowers that bloom purely for the sake of beauty. You pass a cluster of children kneeling in the mud. They laugh in slow, echoing tones, their voices filtered by the thick lake air. Their tunics are streaked with dirt, and their feet are bare, soles toughened by years of planting, jumping, and chasing fish between rows of vegetables. They're not playing. They're learning. This is a school, and this school doesn't have desks, chalkboards, or final exams. Here, learning is done by touch, by taste, by cycle and season. The old man beside them, his braids streaked with gray and his hands permanently stained from the soil, points at a plant with spindly leaves. He murmurs a name. The children repeat it once, twice, then press seeds into the damp earth. Aztec education was no passive affair. Children learned by doing, especially on the Chinampas. From a young age, they memorized planting calendars, learned how to distinguish between helpful and harmful insects, and practiced the art of creating seed mounds with just the right spacing. For the children of farmers, this was more than instruction, it was inheritance. But their learning wasn't only about plants. It extended to rituals, language, and cosmos. The calendar system taught in these Chinampa classrooms was dual-layered. A 260-day ritual cycle, the Tanalpwali, and a 365-day solar cycle, the Zayapawali. The two cycles intertwined like gears, guiding every act of life. From planting squash to naming a newborn. One of the children, a girl with a thin headband woven from lake reeds, kneels beside a small sculpture, a frog carved from stone, placed at the edge of the garden. You recognize it immediately. Tlaloc, the rain god. His wide, goggle-like eyes stare across the rows, eternally watching. Offerings are still placed here. Crushed flowers, a few maize kernels, and a smear of blue paint. Not for spectacle, not for show, but because even now, learning includes reverence. Reverence for rain, for mud, for the balance between chaos and crop. You paddle slowly past, giving the children a wide berth. One of them waves. You wave back. The Chinampa schools were not rare. In fact, the Aztec world valued education across class lines more than many civilizations of its time. There were specialized Calmacacs, elite schools, for nobles and Telpacalis for commoners. But in rural areas, the Chinampa itself often served as the first and most enduring classroom. The curriculum was both humble and vast. How to dig a trench without collapsing the berm. How to time your planting with Venus rising. How to identify the scent of mold before it spreads. How to read omens in the flight of herons. You pass a row of floating flower beds, and for a moment, the canal becomes a corridor of color. Xochitl, the Nahuatl word for flower, was not just a crop. It was a symbol of poetry, of song, of the beauty that must always accompany sustenance. In fact, the phrase for poetry in Nahuatl was in Xochitl and Cuacatl. The flower, the song. You wonder, were these children taught that, too? Not just how to grow, but how to feel. As the canoe slips beyond the children's classroom, the sound of their laughter fades into the reed song. A wind rises, warm and weightless, rustling through the papyrus and water hyacinths. You think of your own childhood, of mud, perhaps, of teachers, of songs, of the slow way that knowledge takes root in us, sometimes without our noticing. You pass a final garden bed, its rows planted in the shape of a spiral, unusual, decorative, maybe just the handiwork of a student who got bored, or a farmer who wanted to make the sun smile. Everything floats, but not everything drifts. The spiral garden fades behind you, its curves still echoing in your thoughts like the lingering trace of a dream as your canoe glides on. The scene shifts once again. The waterways narrow slightly, the Chinampas on either side taller now, with more substantial walls built of packed mud and woven reeds. These are older plots, anchored deep by willow roots that have grown thick and gnarled, hugging the earth like ancient fingers. Time seems slower here. Then, up ahead, you see a man seated alone. He sits cross-legged on a reed mat beneath a canopy of maize stalks, their leaves rustling like whispered prayers. He is motionless except for the rhythmic movement of his hands, which are weaving something long and green and fragrant. You drift closer. In his lap lies a garland of marigolds, each flower threaded with care onto a length of agave fiber. Their golden petals catch the sunlight and flicker like miniature suns, each one a memory, a symbol, a signal that he looks up but says nothing. Only gestures with a nod to the small bundle of copal incense burning gently in a stone dish beside him. You understand. You are witnessing a ritual, a quiet one, deeply personal, yet cosmic in scale. The Aztecs believed the floating gardens were more than fields. They were thresholds, spaces where the earth met the water, where the divine touched the mundane. And just as each flower bloomed from the mud, so too did the soul emerge from the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. This man's garland is not decoration. It is offering to Quetzal, perhaps, the goddess of flowers, fertility, and weaving, or to Tenochtitlan, the Earth Mother. Or perhaps he offers it to no god in particular, but simply to the earth itself, to say thank you, to acknowledge that he is part of something older than memory. You watch as he places the completed garland gently onto the water. It floats beside the Chinampa, spinning slowly, caught in the currentless drift. Then you notice. This isn't the only one. Further along the canal, dozens of garlands float. Some fresh, some wilted, some cradling candles, their flames flickering even in the still air. This is no ordinary day. It is a feast day. Not a loud one with drums and dancers, but a day of quiet tending, of laying thanks at the feet of the gods who make plants grow and the rain fall. In the Aztec calendar, these were known as Nemontemi, days outside the standard count. Days not assigned to any god or omen. Suspended days. Days meant for pause. Farmers would often spend them not planting or harvesting, but remembering, honoring their dead, repairing the garden walls, telling stories to their children by candlelight. Your canoe drifts into a section of the canal where the air is thicker with scent, burning herbs, crushed flowers, wet soil, and something bittersweet, like the air before a summer storm. The water here is littered with petals, not as trash, but as trail markers. A floating memory. A reed boat passes you in silence. Two women aboard, their faces painted in ochre and white. Between them, a large basket brimming with small clay figures, each one shaped like a vegetable. Miniature maize, tiny squash, thumb-sized beans. They're bringing spirit offerings to the temple. You realize figures like these were baked in family hearths. then carried through the canals to be placed at shrines, tokens of thanks and continuity of the harvest past and the one to come. They would be buried in the soil or tossed into the lake, depending on which god you honored. You paddle onward, passing another small dock. An old woman, hunched but dignified, sits there, quietly reciting something under her breath. You catch only fragments, a name, a phrase, the Nahuatl word for again. Perhaps she is speaking to someone she once loved, or asking the gods for one more good season. Your boat turns slowly as the canal bends, revealing a larger clearing, an intersection of waterways where four Chinampas meet like corners of a sacred square. At the center stands a stone platform, half submerged, its surface covered in marigolds, candles, and gourds. Smoke curls up from incense bowls, and the air seems denser here, like the weight of memory is thick enough to touch. This, you realize, is an altar to the lake itself, the body of water that gives and takes, that births gardens and swallows them whole during floods, that carries canoes and stories and the occasional lonely garland made of love. The Aztecs had no single god of the Chinampas. Instead, they honored a network of spirits and deities, each governing a piece of this complex harmony. Tlaloc, for water and rain; Chicamcotl, for maize and sustenance; Zacapili, for beauty and art and the lake itself. Texcoco, seen not as a location but as a living being. You close your eyes for a moment. The scent of marigold, the warmth of the sun, the distant murmur of water against roots. It all becomes a lullaby. You're not asleep, but something quieter, something between awareness and drift. The canoe moves on, and the altar fades into mist. Your canoe enters a quieter channel now. The garlands, the incense, the quiet worship, all of it slips into the distance like a dream half remembered. Ahead, the Chinampas look less adorned, more practical. Rows of vegetables, beans winding up wooden stakes, fat squash vines curling over the edges of the floating beds, and stalks of maize standing tall like sentries. You pass a young boy, maybe 8 or 9, crouched at the edge of one of the islands. He dips a small clay pot into the water, scoops up the murky liquid, and pours it carefully onto the base of a bean plant. Then again, and again. It's methodical, tender, as though he's feeding a pet. An elder watches him from nearby, bent over, sun-darkened, with a face carved by time and wisdom. He nods once, approvingly, but says nothing. This is a teaching moment, and the child already knows. This scene, simple as it is, holds a key truth. These gardens were schools, not of letters or scrolls, but of life, of sun and water and soil. Aztec children learned by doing. They learned how to tend crops, when to sow and when to cut, which plants healed and which poisoned. They learned how the canals breathed, when they rose with flood, when they dried in drought. And they learned reverence, not through sermons, but through dirt under fingernails and the stillness of early morning mist. The canoe glides onward, the rhythm of your paddle joining the soft chorus of frogs, birds, and rustling maize. A few dragonflies skitter across the water's surface like messengers. Then you hear it, a gentle humming. You round a bend, and there she is, an elderly woman seated beneath a low awning made from bundled reeds and old cloth. She's weaving something. No, not cloth. It's a net, made of twisted maguey fibers. Her hands move in practiced loops, pulling and knotting, pulling and knotting. Beside her lies a basket of dried lake weed, the very material that helps bind the Chinampas together. The Aztecs called it a wattle, and it was gathered daily from the canals, then woven or used to fertilize the soil. She hums an old tune as she works. It is not joyful, but not sorrowful either. Just circular, like the gardens, like the calendar. Like the moon's pull on the lake, you drift by slowly. She doesn't look up, doesn't need to. She has seen 1,000 canoes, 1,000 seasons. The water here feels older somehow, though it looks the same. Your paddle sinks in with barely a ripple, the current slack and gentle. And then, you see something strange, that a structure rising from one of the Chinampas. Not a home, not a shrine, but a kind of arch made of bent wood and bound with vines. Flowers dangle from it, blue and red and orange, and beneath it lies a bundle wrapped in white cloth. Two women stand beside it, heads bowed, faces painted with vertical lines of black and yellow. You recognize this, not a burial, not of a person, but of a planting season. The Aztecs often marked the end of a harvest with ritual. The final fruit or vegetable wasn't eaten, it was buried, wrapped in cloth, honored, placed beneath the soil with a prayer. A symbolic death to ensure rebirth. As you watch, one of the women kneels. She lifts the bundle, perhaps a final squash or bundle of maize, and places it gently into a small pit carved into the Chinampa's surface. The other woman scatters petals over it, then earth, then water from a clay jug. The arch above them isn't decoration. It is a portal, a sign that what passes through is not gone, but changed. Your canoe continues. You pass gardens where dogs bark lazily at birds, where men haul baskets of vegetables into flat-bottomed boats, where children shout across the water in bursts of nahuatl, their laughter bouncing off the reeds. Life here is constant, but it is also always dying and renewing. That was the secret the Aztecs understood deeply. That time was not a line, but a loop. That to grow food was to participate in sacred rhythm. And that even in the mud, there was divinity. You pass under a bridge made of lashed logs. On the far side, the canals widen again. You feel it before you see it, a change in scale, in presence, in power. You are approaching the great temple garden. The water stills, the sky seems to quiet. A single heron lifts from the reeds ahead, its wings slow and silent, like pages turning in a forgotten book. And beyond it, you see the outline of a stone platform rising from the water's edge, flanked by massive Chinampas, each more elaborate than the last. Here, the flowers are not for offerings alone. They are messages. Each color, each bloom, each cluster carefully arranged to speak in the language of the gods. You are nearly there, and you do not rush. The water, after all, decides the pace. The canoe slows as you approach the great ceremonial Chinampa. This one is not like the others. It is wider, twice, maybe 3 times the size of a normal garden. Its edges are reinforced with dark volcanic stone, not just woven reeds. Steps rise from the water up to a broad, flat surface covered not in crops, but in flowers, everywhere. Flowers, brilliant marigolds, deep crimson dahlias, white lilies, and the sacred xochitl, the Aztec word for flower, but also for beauty, truth, and life force. They spill over the sides in colorful waves, arranged in intricate patterns, some forming spirals, others like rays of sun or wings of birds. They were not placed casually. Each shape has meaning. Each blossom speaks to the gods, and at the center stands a tall wooden post, painted red and wrapped with green vines. At its top, a sculpted sun disk, gold leaf glinting in the fading light. This is no ordinary garden. This is a floral calendar, a sacred place where time is measured in petals. You drift silently to the edge, pulling the canoe alongside a stone pier. The moment your foot touches the Chinampa's soil, the air seems to shift. The scents intensify, sweet, earthy, heady. Bees hum in soft spirals through the air. Somewhere, a wooden flute plays a slow, descending melody. There's no one in sight, but you know you're not alone. This is a temple to Tenochtitlan, the sun god. And it's not built of stone, but of growth, a living monument that blooms, withers, and blooms again, tracking the passing of days better than any sundial. To the Aztecs, flowers were time. Each bloom that opened in the morning and closed by dusk was a miniature day. Each vine that curled upward toward the sun was a journey. Each fallen petal, a memory returned to the earth. You kneel and run your fingers gently over the warm soil. Beneath it, bones. Not human, but botanical. Generations of dead flowers, composted and sacred, building layer upon layer of rich, dark earth. Every flower planted here was chosen carefully, according to the day's significance, the moon's cycle, the needs of the city, and the will of the priest-gardeners. These were the Tonalpuk, the keepers of days. They didn't just grow food or arrange flowers. They interpreted fate. With hands stained in pollen and mud, they whispered with the gods. When to begin a war, when to heal, when to wed, when to sacrifice, all read from the language of plants. Suddenly, you notice something tucked under a canopy of white orchids. A codex, open and anchored by two obsidian stones. The pages are made of bark paper, worn and curled at the edges. Painted on them are symbols, bright pigments in red, green, and gold. You recognize the glyph for Xochitl, flower, for Tonatiuh, the sun, for Atl, water. But there's more. Lines connect the symbols like vines. They do not form sentences. They form cycles. You stare at the codex as the breeze flutters its corners. The message is not meant to be read aloud, but felt. Understood the way one feels the shift in seasons. Not with logic, but with breath. You sit there for some time, not thinking, just breathing, letting the world speak in colors and scent and rhythm. The flute fades. The sky deepens into a soft lavender, and then you hear it again, drums. Faint, but growing. From across the lake, not war drums. Not the thunderous cadence of battle. These are flower drums, used only in ritual. 2 beats. A pause, then 3 more. Soft, like a heart. The festival of flowers must be reaching its crescendo. You glance back across the water, and for the first time, you realize the Chinampas, from above, would form a pattern. A cosmic diagram. The canals aren't random, they're lines. The gardens, dots. Together, a map. A story. A calendar written in earth and water. And this ceremonial Chinampa, the center. The sun's EYE.IT is no wonder they worshipped here, and no wonder they fought to protect this place. Even as the empire crumbled, in a wonder the gods were said to smile down when the flowers bloomed on time. You return to the canoe, stepping back gently as you push off and drift again into the water. Your paddle catches a floating blossom. A single marigold. You lift it out of the canal and place it in your LAP.IT was once an offering, and now a memory. Just like this journey. You are not sure how long you've been on the water. Time here does not behave like it does elsewhere. But you know this. You will not forget this place. The Chinampas of Tenochtitlan. The flower rituals of the sun. The gardens that dreamed. And the way the world once whispered its secrets in color and bloom.